Hi, my name is David Lindstrom. I'm a doctoral candidate here at the University of California, San Diego in anthropology, and this is June. And I want to talk today about integrity. And I've learned a lot about integrity, I think, in the last 4 years. And I'm not exactly sure why I'm doing this video. Maybe it's partly to try to help people, maybe it's partly my own therapy. Um, I'll start off by saying I'm a whistleblower. On illegal activity that occurred here at UCSD. And I'm not going to get into the specifics. I do think that, let's see if I put on these glasses. I do think that when people make allegations against individuals and even against very, very particular institutions, that they need to substantiate those allegations with documentation, and that the certainty of the allegation, the specificity of the allegation need to be substantiated with an appropriate amount of evidence. And that evidence exists. It's well documented, and I think it's highly likely that eventually I'll make a video which goes into it in detail. But for today, I just want to talk about it insofar as how it affected me and what I think I've learned about integrity as a consequence of being a whistleblower for 4.5 years now. The illegal behavior began in 2021. It continued in 2023. It was well documented. It came into my possession without me seeking it. It just happened to come into my possession in my professional capacities here at the university. This illegal behavior was well documented by the people who engaged in it, and it was supported by the institution. And I whistleblowed on it again and again. Nobody did anything. At present, there's at least two different investigations, one at the level of the university. They're calling it a preliminary inquiry. They're very... and it's also under investigation by the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission and the Department of Justice. Hey, sweetie. Being a whistleblower is really hard. I'm almost kind of tearing up when I talk about it. I was reading a peer-reviewed article recently that was put out by it was published by the National Institutes of Health. You can find it on PubMed. And it looked at the mental health outcomes for whistleblowers, and they were roughly equivalent to cancer patients. So it's really difficult being a whistleblower. Being a whistleblower begins when you come into possession of information that indicates that wrongdoing is occurring. And this wrongdoing is accepted by, encouraged by a large number of individuals in the institution where it's occurring. Right? If that wasn't the case, there would be no need to whistleblow. It would have been addressed. So whistleblowing necessarily entails acting in opposition to the people you are surrounded with. And if it occurs in a job site, it means that you are putting yourself in some ways in opposition to the goals and desires of the people in the social network in which you are embedded and upon which you rely for your income, right? And by extension, housing and food and healthcare and all the other sorts of things that we associate with employment. And so by whistleblowing, you are putting those things in jeopardy for the purposes of an ideal, right? For the purposes of morality. And there's various dimensions to that. Various dimensions of sort of putting yourself at risk. It is, of course, true that there are legal and occupational protections um, that are in place to protect whistleblowers. In an ideal world, you're not supposed to be retaliated against. But these are just words on a page. And whistleblower retaliation is a very real thing, and it happens. And there's all kinds of ways you can retaliate against a whistleblower without putting in documentary form that that's what's occurring. And that's especially, of course, true for graduate students. Most evaluations are very subjective in graduate school. If there is some objective nature to the evaluations, oftentimes that objectivity is really only understood by people within the discipline and wouldn't be understood by the very people who would be adjudicating, let's say, a whistleblower complaint. Obviously, letters of recommendation are completely optional. If someone refuses to write a letter of recommendation, you can't claim that that's a whistleblower retaliation. And then if you stick around in the place where you whistleblowed, the consequence of that is it's very psychically draining. You sort of have two options. You can, if you're a whistleblower, you can be quiet and not tell anybody outside of the people to whom you reported the wrongdoing that you are in fact the whistleblower. So if you're a graduate student and let's say you whistleblow to academic personnel or to the ombudsman, somebody like that, you go through your department and you are constantly aware that you have done something that if people were to find out could put your career in jeopardy. And so you put yourself in the position of constantly hiding. And of course, if you're in the position of constantly hiding, that communicates to your deep nervous system that there is in fact danger. And so you're going to go through your experience constantly perceiving that there's danger in your place of work. And that's going to be very caustic and damaging to your psyche and to your body. The other option, of course, is to be very vocal and adamant about the fact that wrongdoing occurred, and then that has its own problems, right? People could accuse you of making false accusations, even if the accusations are true. People would give you the cold shoulder. All the people that you live and work with and move around, maybe not live with, but certainly spend a great deal of time with, won't like you, especially if you're putting their career in jeopardy. So it's a really awful position to be in. And it's certainly been awful for me. I can tell you, being a whistleblower is awful. It's just awful. So you have to have a very strong sense of integrity if you're going to be a whistleblower. So what does integrity mean? I think we can think about this metaphorically, right? So if you have a ship that has integrity, it means that all the parts of the ship are working coherently and in unison in order to accomplish something. So we talk about watertight integrity with the ship. Well, what does that mean? It means the water doesn't get in. It means that all the different parts of the ship are working together to keep the water out. If a ship doesn't have watertight integrity, there's something that's not working coherently or in unison with other things in order to accomplish the goal. So there's this idea of coherence. There's this idea of a well-ordered structure that where everything is working in unison. So if we were to transfer that idea of integrity from the ship to the human being, what that would mean is that the actions are congruent with the averred philosophy, right? So let's say that I philosophically claim that it's immoral and illegal to discriminate on the basis of race in hiring. If I'm a person of integrity, that means that my actions are going to be congruent with that belief. So if I were to discover that people were in fact discriminating on the basis of race in hiring, I would report it. If I didn't report it, that would mean that my actions are not congruent with my beliefs. So integrity is going to have a cost. If you are in any way associated socially with people, you're in a social context wherein your beliefs demand action that's going to be in any way socially stigmatized. Now that might mean speaking up, right? When people are saying things that are harmful, right? So if you have an ethic of non-racism and you're in a place where people are saying racist things, then if you're a person of integrity, you're going to speak up, right? If you're a non-racist um, in a place where people are discriminating on the basis of race and hiring, well, that means you're going to have to speak up. You're going to have to become a whistleblower, right? So uh, integrity has a cost. So one of the interesting questions to me is, in the process of all this, in the context where, at least, hey, sweetie, she's wanting to get up and move around. In a context where, you know, clearly illegal behavior was occurring, letting her down. Why didn't anybody else say anything? Why was I the only whistleblower? Um, and I've asked people about this, and what I've received in return is a simple failure to acknowledge reality, to acknowledge the clear documentary evidence that was produced that substantiated the illegality. I received denial, um, justifications, rationalizations, but at the same time, people continuing to claim that they espouse and hold a value system which was clearly violated. So why would this happen? And in thinking about this, I've looked back on times in my life where I haven't acted with integrity, and asked myself, well, why didn't I act with integrity? So I can think of a very recent occurrence where I didn't act with integrity, and uh, I committed the sin of dishonesty. I said I would do one thing, I did another thing, and it, I think, probably destroyed this relationship that I had. And I look back on it and I said, well, why did I do this thing? And looking back on it, I did it out of fear. I was afraid that if I acted differently, that there would be, a very negative consequence for me. And so one reason I think why we don't act with integrity is fear. And we may not have a fully fledged idea of what, in fact, we are afraid of. Our deep nervous system might have an idea of what we're afraid of, but our cortex might not. So here's what I mean. At the time that I whistleblowed, I had no idea what the psychological consequences would be in my prefrontal cortex, the part of my brain which produces the kind of consciousness that I'm most aware of. In the years that followed, and as a consequence of a number of other things, whistleblowing was simply one factor among many. I experienced a lot of stress and really extreme physical consequences and psychological consequences that I'm still dealing with. And from this, I take the lesson that our bodies and our, I'm going to call body consciousnesses, the kind of consciousness that's associated with our limbic system, our amygdala, kind of these older conserved part of our nervous systems upon which our later much larger sort of cortex was built on top of, are constantly trying to keep us safe. That's one of the purposes of a nervous system, is to keep a body safe. And I do think that as we move through social space, our perceptual apparatus And that includes these deeply conserved parts of our nervous system, like the limbic system, which is the part of our brain that houses emotions and memories, and the amygdala, which is the part of the brain which is the threat response system that goes off whenever we notice a deep threat and is very hyperactive in people with trauma. Um, those parts of our brain and body, that perceptual apparatus, and it's constantly trying to keep us safe. And in terms of the kind of chain of causality that occurs, oftentimes it makes the decisions, and then our cortical consciousness, our neocortex, and our Broca's and Wernicke's areas, these parts of our brain that are associated with language production, come by in the wake and then act to justify the decisions that have already been made. So let's say that I'm in a context where there's a particular action that's occurring in my workplace, and my neocortex, the part that's involved with abstract symbolic reasoning, makes the assessment that the actions that are occurring within my workplace are in violation of the values that I hold, values which are also semiotically encoded, values which are also linguistically encoded. In other words, there's a language operation that's occurring within the neocortex. There's an evaluation of the action that's occurring in my workplace. There's a comparison to a linguistically encoded value, and then there's the conclusion that the actions are in violation of the value. Okay, that's let's say a particular operation that's going on. Simultaneous to this, there is the evaluation by these older parts of the brain, the limbic system, the amygdala, that to speak up, in other words, to do what would be required according to the ethical framework housed in the neocortex, would be to put oneself and by extension one's body in danger. If the evaluation of these older parts of the nervous system is such that the conclusion is, by speaking up, we're putting ourselves in extreme danger. If there's a certain amount of disintegration within the person, in other words, if cortex and limbic system and amygdala are not working coherently in order to move the body and the consciousness through space in a way that is congruent with one's values, the older part of the nervous system, the limbic system, the amygdala, is going to make the decision, don't say anything. This is going to put us in danger. In other words, that decision is primal. That decision occurs first in the order condescendi. And then the cortex comes along later and rationalizes the actions. And we'll come up with whatever rationalization works best in order to justify what the body consciousness has already decided. And to me, that theory goes a long way towards explaining why nobody spoke up in my own department. It goes a long way toward explaining why the psychological and physiological consequences of being a whistleblower were so extreme for me. And it also helps us to explain why the tribal language on both sides of the debate within our country doesn't seem to make sense to the other side. You know, if you're on the right, and my guess is the more tribal somebody is, the more they perceive that it's necessary to be part of the tribe in order to be safe. And that's a decision that's made in the limbic system, the amygdala, partly the hippocampus. Then the cortex comes along later and justifies the bodily decisions towards safety that have already been made. And then the same is true on the left. And so if the question is, are people on both sides acting with integrity? Well, the answer would be, well, no, right? And they're not acting with integrity precisely because there is an outward protestation towards consistency and living out a set of values, but then the actions don't match up. And the actions don't match up precisely because the limbic system, the amygdala, the body aren't trying to act with integrity. They're trying to keep the body safe. I hope you followed me so far. I know um, these are kind of thoughts that go through my head all the time, and it's a little bit isolating to sort of have these sorts of thoughts and feel like I'm the only person that's thinking them. So, what do you want to do if you act with integrity? If you want to act with integrity, that's a question. That's a real hard question to answer, right? Because if you are surrounded by a particular tribe and you act in a way that's contrary to what the tribe and the tribal members perceive as being in their best interest, you are putting yourself in danger. So it's a little um, unfair of me sort of to sit here and to say, hey, always act with integrity, no matter where you're at. Put yourself in danger, put your psyche in danger, put your body in danger, put yourself in a position where you might be traumatized, where you might lose your job, where you might lose your house, where you might not be able to pay for your kids' education, where you might not be able to pay for your health care. The more tribal society becomes, the more the universal admonition towards integrity can become a de facto admonition towards putting yourself in danger if you find yourself among tribalists, which is increasingly the case. So then how do you do this? How do you try to act with integrity, not as an abstract, uh, pure consciousness, sort of a brain in a vat, um, a Kantian actor, um, a philosophy student, but as a real embodied creature in the world with concrete relationships with the people around you, relationships that are going to be affected perhaps in sometimes very negative ways and maybe even in um, uh, counterproductive ways, were you to put into effect this abstract ideal um, into practice in all cases. What I've done in trying to heal from the psychological and embodied consequences of being a whistleblower is that I've tried to put myself in a position where I am held up and uplifted by social relationships with people who are accepting of me um, and who show me love. And so that my body feels safe. One thing that I've learned is that the cortex and the neocortex and what I'll call cortical consciousness, this sort of linguistic abstract reasoning, may be under the impression that it makes determinations as to the safety of danger on the basis of purely abstract considerations. And I don't actually think that's the case. I think that we feel safe when we are loved. Love and safety are really close together. They're very twinned together. And that's why I think you can have people that are dying that feel safe because they're surrounded by love. And why you can have people that, on the basis of objective criteria, are in no danger whatsoever and yet um, feel extreme danger. And that's a bit of a reductivism, of course. It's far more complicated than that. Some people are really surrounded by love and are objectively safe and feel like they're in a lot of danger. So I don't want to be too reductive about this. And maybe I just slipped into too much reductivism, and if I reduced your experience, I'm sorry. Um, but I think it has been the case for me that being in concrete relationships where love is being given and received has helped me to feel safe and has helped me to carry out my present role as a whistleblower while feeling more safety. And so from this, I think I infer that one of the grounds of possibility for acting with integrity in the world while maintaining a trajectory towards health is being in loving and accepting relationships. And I also think that it may be a precondition of finding the truth to be in loving and accepting relationships. If we're not in loving and accepting relationships, there's, I think, going to be this hyper alertness towards danger that occurs within the nervous system, the deep nervous system. And then the deep nervous system is going to make decisions not based on truth, but um, for the purposes of keeping one safe. And then, as I said before, the neocortex is going to follow along in the wake of that and make up whatever justifications are necessary to justify what the deep nervous system and the body have already decided. And as a Christian, I think, this alignment and deep connection between safety, love, and truth is certainly part of the Gospels. God is represented as being love, and God is represented as being truth. And I don't think that it's because these are two totally separate phenomena. I think that we need to love and we need to be loved in order to pursue truth really effectively, especially in a time when um, danger seems to be all around. So go out and find love in the world. That's hard. It's easy to say, go out and find love in the world. It's a little harder to find it because love is a grace. Um, how have I found it? I don't know. It was through grace. I ended up going to a church here in La Jolla and started singing in a choir, and there were just loving people there. Um, I wish I could guide people towards love a little better. Maybe I can send a little love to you right now. Like, if you're listening to this and you've made it this far, even if you turned it off earlier, um, I think you as a human being, it's your purpose to be in love. It's your purpose to receive love and to give love. And I think that there's a part of you that is very capable of doing so. And you may have gone through an extreme amount of suffering in life. You might have a lot of defense mechanisms. You might feel like there's something broken inside. And I've been in all those places. And what I've found for me is that are beings, personalities, parts of creation inside of me that even behind all the defense mechanisms and the guilt and the shame and um, the histories, right, and the traumas and all those sorts of things, that nevertheless are waiting for love and can be rescued and can be brought into um, the love of the divine and can be conduits for the divine and can become more of who they are by accepting love from other people. And I think when we do that, I think that when we more fully move into love and we experience more safety and through the embodied sense that everything's going to be all right and that the safety um, is something to be had, something that's achievable, something that we're moving towards, that makes possible the integrity in a more full way. I would say that is the case. So I want to be a little more concrete. What do you do? Maybe I'll send out a little love to my fellow whistleblowers or the people who are thinking about whistleblowing. And I've been very philosophical, so I want to get more concrete. I'll give some advice that I wish I'd had. I would say if you are in your capacity of work, right, in a place where your success or your continued maintenance in your role is necessary to meet basic needs in life, income, housing, food, and you become aware of impropriety, and your value system requires you to whistleblow. My advice is, unless there's an immediate danger to somebody, document what you're doing, find a new job, transition into your new job, then report it. That would be my advice. I wouldn't say stay in place. And I would even say that for someone that's in a PhD. If you've spent a bunch of time in a PhD and you become aware of impropriety, quit, man. There's other things out there than getting your doctorate, and nothing is worth the cost to your brain and your body. Um, that can happen if you're a whistleblower at your work. It really isn't. That might mean setting aside your ego, picking a different career. But unless it's safety critical, I would urge pretty much all whistleblowers to document what you're doing, get a new job, quit, start your new job, and then whistleblow, rather than whistleblowing in place, because it's just too toxic for your body. If you are one of those people and something safety critical comes up, and you choose to whistleblow right away, and you deal with the consequences of that, God bless you, man. I feel you. I don't know. Great is your reward in heaven, as a Christian would say. Um, you know, good on you. And if you're in that position, I would say be aware that there's probably going to be a lot of gaslighting that occurs. There's probably going to be minimization of the danger. There's probably going to be people questioning your sanity. Um, Whistleblowing in place almost certainly is going to bring along a sense of being gaslighted. Um, Spend as much as and do what you need to do to survive in that case. Spend as little time at work as possible. Isolate yourself from those folks. Reach out to friends. Um, Punch a pillow. Uh, do some screaming in a place where you can do that and feel good about it, and aren't going to freak other people out. Um, do what you can to keep a hold of your own psyche, and not let the whistleblowers colonize your brain. Um, Gaslighting is one of the worst things about being a whistleblower. Um, Fly around here, uh, which again is why it's a great idea to leave before you whistleblow. Um, but hold on to that. Hold on to your basic values, and recognize that in the long term, you're probably going to be better off by holding on to those values. And then the last piece of being a whistleblower is forgiving, right? Forgiving the people who put you into that intolerable position. And forgiving doesn't mean reconciliation. Part of forgiveness for me has actually been writing formal business letters to state my objections to the people who committed the wrongdoing. Uh, that's helped me to externalize a lot of the psychic garbage that you get from being a whistleblower. Um, Telling people exactly what you think and what you object to can be really, really helpful. Therapy, helpful. Exercise, flow activities, rock climbing, swimming, very helpful. Can be all helpful in the process of healing, and by extension, healing, moving towards forgiveness. Right? You can't really forgive without healing, and you can't fully heal without forgiving, which is letting go. It's not right. Reconciliation. It's not trying to be friends with the folks that put you in this position. If you are a whistleblower and you want to reach out, feel free to put a message in the comments. If you're looking to act with more integrity in your life, spend a little time figuring out what your value system is. Write it down. And recognize that if you are going to act with integrity, it's going to put you in a position where you're going to have to do things that are costly. If you're living a life where you never have to go against the flow because of the things you believe, if you never have to stand up to the people around you, you're probably not. There's a decent chance you're not living with integrity. It's not a certainty, but there's a chance. And so take a look back on your past and think about, are there moments when I really should have said something or done something and I didn't? And then finally, the healthier you can get in your relationships, the more love you can have in your life, with people that really accept you, for who you are, uh, the more safe you'll be. And the more safe you are, uh, the more empowered you are going to be, to stand up for your values. I think that's it. Hope you benefited from this in some way.